Oh, Balloon Fight. Where do I start with this classic NES title? Its original Japanese release was for Nintendo's classic console, the Famicom, before also getting released for its Western counterpart, the NES, as one of the console's famous black box games. Like several other early NES titles, it also had an arcade version, appropriately titled Versus Balloon Fight, which actually came out before the NES or Famicom version. It's since been ported to a handful of 80s PCs, got a second arcade port via the NES Play Choice 10, and has been released on each iteration of the Virtual Console and Nintendo Switch Online, and was also available on the Game Boy Advance e-reader, which is actually the first version of the game I owned as a kid. Even though my first copy of the game was for the e-reader, I had actually grown up playing the NES release at a family friend's house. The teenage son of one of my mom's friends used to babysit me when I was little, and I remember being mesmerized by his NES collection. Playing his NES when I'd visit his house was actually how I was introduced to games like Balloon Fight and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it's probably one of the reasons why I'm a fan of retro gaming to begin with. At its core, Balloon Fight is an extremely simple game and owes a lot of its design to 1982's Joust. While undeniably similar to Joust, I do think that the tweaks and variations that Nintendo made to the graphics and presentation of the game make it a more interesting and fun experience. However, this could also just be bias on my part, as I've been playing Balloon Fight for as long as I can remember. I've always felt that when it came to the early NES's library, specifically the black box titles, games came in one of three flavors. There were your sports titles, which mostly haven't aged well, your arcade titles that have aged better but are also still rooted in mid-80s game design for better or for worse, and the company's defining Italian plumbers games. Oh, and I guess there's a fourth tier for the Donkey Kong games, which honestly fall into the second tier of early NES titles, but are a bit more iconic due to featuring Donkey Kong. However, of all the early NES's arcade-style games, again excluding, I actually think that Balloon Fight is among the best of the console's early offerings. Upon boot up, Balloon Fight has three different modes. It has your standard single-player mode, a cooperative mode that mirrors it, albeit with a second player and the inclusion of friendly fire, and a third mode named Balloon Trip, which I'll get into later. The main objective of Balloon Fight is to fly your character around the stage in order to pop the balloons of the other characters on screen. You can pop their balloons by crashing into them from above, which sends them parachuting to the ground. Once they're on the ground, you'll be able to, kill them, I guess, by crashing into them a second time. Though you could do it from eye level now if you like to stare your victims in the eye. If you fail to finish them off once they've landed and you give them enough time to recover, they'll eventually inflate new balloons and take to the skies again. Like I said earlier, it's a very simple game and fits in well with other arcade titles from the time. While there are obstacles for you to avoid, such as a giant fish, flippers that would later become iconic thanks to their appearance in the Super Smash Bros. Series, and lightning sparks that can one-shot you, Balloon Fight lays a lot of its cards on the table in its first stage, which only has 3 enemies in a single platform. This first stage is incredibly easy and can be beaten in seconds, but it's a low-stakes enough arena for new players to acquaint themselves with the controls. In order to fly, you'll need to repeatedly tap the A button or hold the B button on your controller in order to make your character flap his arms as if they were wings. The controls are perfectly functional. They're good, but not too good, and can be best described as being the right mix of floaty enough to be challenging, but responsive enough to feel intuitive. While your character is flapping his arms, you'll be able to steer him to the left and right of the screen, either to chase or escape your enemies. Because you can only steer while you're flapping your arms, there's a layer of strategy to traveling around the game's stages, and you'll often find yourself needing to balance your ascent and descent in order to wiggle your way out of tricky situations and avoid taking a hit. Your character comes stocked with 2 balloons and can get hit twice before losing a life. I love the fact that this is clearly telegraphed to the player by the number of balloons that your character has, as it's as quick and easy to pick up as the rest of the game is, which helps with its accessibility. On top of that, you aren't automatically re-equipped with balloons between stages and have to wait until a bonus stage to get your health restored. As for the bonus stages, they have you chasing free-floating balloons as they escape from pipes. Again, really simple stuff here, but it's a lot of fun due to the controls, which keeps things feeling just a little hectic. While I'm not the best balloon fight player in the world, I never feel particularly cheated out of a life when I'm playing the game. Yes, there are moments when I feel out of control of my character, but I'm always reminded of the fact that this is by design and, as such, don't feel that frustrated by it. The only real complaint I have is that you don't get any sort of invincibility frame after you take a hit, which means that it's easy for enemies to trap you on the top of the map and quickly pop both of your balloons, causing you to lose a life. But if I'm being honest, while I'm not thrilled about this, it does lead to more tense and thoughtful gameplay. Presentation-wise, Balloon Fight keeps things nice and clean. Your character has a couple of animations that he cycles through and is a fairly small and undetailed sprite. Despite this, it's not that hard to get a feel for the sort of character that he is though, given his primary color scheme and the fact that he's flying around on balloons. He comes across as a bit playful and whimsical, and certainly represents that Nintendo wholesomeness that the company has been trying to sell us since the 80s. The graphics surrounding him are also somewhat playful, though it's interesting that Balloon Fight takes place at night against a black background when the game's playful theme and premise are almost begging for a sunshiny backdrop. I'm assuming this has something to do with hardware and color palette limitations from the time, but I could be wrong. Either way, I actually kinda like how sparse the background is in this game, as it keeps the focus squarely on your character and his opponents. There's even a lack of music in the typical balloon fight stage, which also kinda points towards trying to focus on popping your enemy's balloons. That's not to say there isn't accompaniment to the gameplay though. In addition to the sorts of bleeps and bloops you'd expect from an NES title, there's also what could best be described as free-form sine waves that follow you throughout the gameplay. Candidly, it's a bit hard to listen to at first, but at the very least, I don't miss listening to chiptune music while I'm playing the game, which might be due to its arcadey design. It reminds me of being in high school and playing Atari 2600 or early arcade games on an emulator, with my only accompaniment being the bleeps and bloops of the gameplay. I think the Angry Video Game Nerd said it best in his Atari 5200 review when he said that these kinds of games just don't need music.
And the lack of music just enhances the mood. It's that special kind of atmosphere when it's in the middle of the night and you're sitting in the glow of your TV with the sound of crickets.
However, that doesn't mean that Balloon Fight doesn't have chiptune music. In fact, Balloon Fight has what might be one of my favorite NES tunes of all time. In the game's bonus stages, as well as in its third game mode Balloon Trip, the game hits you with an absolute bop of a song. It's an extremely playful song that has the kind of bass line that gets stuck in your head, as well as a melody that's equally catchy. Balloon Fight also has a great game over jingle that, in my opinion, is equally awesome. Both tunes capture the sort of whimsical presentation that elevates this game over Joust for me. There's a breeziness to this game that feels incredibly inviting to newcomers, and the music, despite how it isn't even played during most levels, is a great companion to that. Speaking of Balloon Trip, it's crazy to think that this is only a secondary game mode, as it's extremely addictive. Instead of floating around a static screen and trying to ruthlessly murder other air travelers, the objective of this mode is to navigate an auto-scrolling obstacle course, which is filled with sparks for you to avoid, balloons for you to collect, and bubbles that can stop the screen from scrolling for a couple of seconds. That's seriously all there is to it. It's a quaint little romp that repackages the flight mechanics of the main game and turns them into an endurance test. Despite that, I'd honestly love to see Nintendo revisit Balloon Fight and give this game a treatment similar to Super Mario Bros. 35 or Tetris 99. I think the idea of racing through an obstacle course with maybe a dozen or so other players would be a lot of fun, and it would be cool to see Nintendo revisit another one of its classic games outside of just referencing it in Smash Bros. As I've said multiple times throughout this review, Balloon Fight is an extremely simple game. While it doesn't have that much going for it in terms of variety or complex objectives, it gets a lot of mileage out of what is there and honestly has some incredible physics for an early NES game. Thanks to being such a common early NES title, as well as one that's not necessarily in that high of demand, it doesn't seem to command that high of a price either. At least once you factor in the fact that NES games seem to be rising in price in general. That's mostly anecdotal to what I've seen though, but the point I'm trying to make is that Balloon Fight is a great addition to any NES newcomer's collection. It provides tons of fun, bite-sized gameplay through its main game mode, as well as even more fun through the balloon trip mode. If you're new to collecting for the NES and are looking for something easy to pick up and play, perhaps with family or a younger sibling, you really can't go wrong with Balloon Fight. And for Nintendo Switch owners, you can actually play the game for free right now through Nintendo Switch Online. All you need is an active subscription, and if you're like me and like to mindlessly play video games while you rewatch a TV show for the millionth time, this game is going to be right up your alley. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. If you guys have any memories with Balloon Fight that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it in the comments. So, yeah, bye.